Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are a Markham Community Church located in the Greater Toronto Area with a passion for helping you engage in an authentic, life-giving community. We would love to connect with you further. Please take a moment and check out our website, where you can find more information about our ministry. Well, we hope you're blessed by today's message.
Well, here it is, daylight savings time. I don't know about you guys, but this year, I lost an hour. I felt it. I don't know about you, but I felt it. This whole idea of daylight savings time, it's taking an hour from the darker part of the day and adding it to the lighter part of the day so as to add productivity, so as to somehow increase the potential for our productivity. I don't know if you realize it, but that's exactly the reason and the logic behind this daylight savings time. And that actually, interestingly enough and ironically, sort of flies in the face with what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about sloth. Sloth. Interesting that I would bring to you the topic of sloth. I think sloth is a problem for every one of us at some level, to some degree. And sloth, simply put, is avoiding the opportunity to be productive in any given moment and opportunity in life. And so I want to talk to you about sloth. And sloth is actually one of the 7 deadly sins. It's one of the 7 cardinal sins. So there's pride, there's greed, there's lust, there's envy, there's gluttony, there's wrath, and then finally there's sloth. It's part of the 7 deadly sins. And you might be thinking to yourself, really? Sloth is kind of like the lightweight when you list off all of those deadly sins. Seriously, how can sloth be a deadly sin? And when it comes to the other 6, we get it. We know pride goes before the fall. We know anger too often leads to violence. We know that lust destroys us from the inside out. We know that envy is what put Jesus on the cross. We even get that gluttony can lead to premature death. We understand that. But seriously, has anyone ever died from taking it easy? I'm pretty sure the coroner's report has never read cause of death, too many naps. Right? Sloth may not get you to the top of the ladder, but really, is it that bad? That's not to mention the fact that North Americans are probably the most hyperactive people on the planet. We literally run on Tim Hortons dark roast, Starbucks new nitrogen-infused blends, Red Bull, or even Adderall as prescribed by our doctors. We work longer hours and take fewer vacations than ever. When we're not on the job, we're making home improvements, driving the kids someplace, and if we can fit it in, we'll try to somehow get a workout in to our schedules. Sloth seems to be the least deadly and the least relevant of all the 7 deadly sins that I would bring to you. Yet we all procrastinate. Every one of us daydreams. We run late for appointments or miss them entirely. We fritter away whole evenings in front of the television set. We spend too much time on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, or whatever our web addiction happens to be. We intend for things to happen that we never actually initiate or start. We start things that we never actually finish. We end up neglecting God or people because of laziness or possibly even distraction. Maybe that's why the Bible takes this whole issue of sloth so seriously. Look at what King Solomon has to say about sloth. He says, "How long will you lie there, O sluggard?" I can actually hear Deb saying this to me sometimes, when I'm on, it just sort of hit me that way, just in that moment. "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man." That bit of ancient wisdom comes to us by way of Solomon, one of the wisest men in the world. And he was arguably one of the most industrious men as well. And yet he discovered firsthand the trouble that a person can get into when they have too much time on their hands. A later verse in that same collection of verses points it out even more directly. This is Solomon again speaking, where he says, "One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys." One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. Really? Think about it. How many dreams have died? How many relationships have suffered? How many plans have been aborted? How many initiatives have failed simply for lack of effort? Maybe it's time we took this topic of sloth a little more seriously. And during this soul-searching season of Lent, and some of us are actually practicing Lent as we make our way into Easter this year. Even during this soul-searching season of Lent, where we are to be taking personal stock in our lives, we can see that all 7 of these deadly sins are lurking in the dark corners of our souls. They're robbing us of joy, ruining relationships, wreaking havoc in society. But along the way, we've also found help, we've found healing, and we've found hope for overcoming these dark tendencies. This will be true for sloth as well. So let's turn our attention to this thing called sloth. What is it, and why is it so deadly? Now, some of us, when we hear the word sloth, we think of that 3-toed mammal famous for hanging around and moving slowly. This mammal, by the way, has a super slow metabolism, and so they just are incredibly lazy, these things that are literally referred to as sloths. But we also could think about the 5-toed mammal, the human who sits on the couch, which helps to clarify the meaning of the word for us. The dictionary defines sloth as a reluctance to work or make an effort. Sloth is the reluctance to work or make an effort. One definition is this: the habitual disinclination towards exertion. You just imagine, that person who's laying on the couch for hours on end, the habitual disinclination towards exertion. Then we can add a number of synonyms that help us clarify what it means to be slothful. So laziness, idleness, sluggishness, apathy, lassitude, it's a new word I learned this week, lethargy, languor, torpidity, that's another new word I learned this week. None of which look good on the resume, of course. The ancient word, by the way, for sloth comes from the word acedia, which means the lack of care. The lack of care. Slothfulness thrives not only by way of a lack, but sometimes by way of an abundance. How does this so? By way of an abundance of activity, purposeless activity, distracting activity. The pastor John Piper, he writes this about sloth. He says, "This shocking manifestation of sloth is what I like to call the zombie effect. The slothful zombie may live a very busy life, but he does just enough to get things done so he can get back to enjoying his comforts. Duties are what he performs, but comfort is what he craves. The zombie lives his routine in a fog, sleepwalking between weekends. Sloth devastates lives slowly and subtly," he says. He quotes Frederick Breutner, who writes this of the zombie. He says, "Sloth is not to be confused with laziness. A slothful person may be a very busy person. They are a people who goes through the motions, who flies on automatic pilot, like a person with a bad head cold. They have mostly lost their sense of taste or smell. People come and go, but through glazed eyes, they hardly ever notice them, and they're letting life run its course with absolutely no thoughtfulness or conviction." Richard Newhouse defines contemporary sloth as evenings without number obliterated by television. Evenings neither of entertainment or education, but a narcotic defense against time and duty. This is sloth at its deadly best, trying to preserve personal comforts through the candy of endless amusements. Sloth is a chronic quest for worldly comfort that compounds our boredom, by the way. Our boredom gets thicker and thicker and thicker as we seek the comfortable life. Boredom with God, boredom with people, and boredom with life. I was talking to a young man recently, and we were sharing a cup of coffee together, and they were talking to me about the malaise that they were personally experiencing. And they began to describe this disconnect they're feeling with God. They began to talk about how it's challenging at this moment in their life with their family. They find themselves, not overly engaged with their friends the way they used to. And he began to describe to me that he feels as if he's losing his faith. And so we had a conversation, and I asked him, I said, when's the last time you read your Bible? And he said, I don't know, man. He says, it's been like 6, 7, 8 months. I don't know. It's been a long time. I said, when's the last time you were in church? He said, last summer. Last summer I was in church. I said, great. I said, when's the last time that you were in a life group situation where you were sitting with others and you were talking about Jesus? I've never done that, right? And so I said to him, I said, I'm picking up from you that you're bored. I'm picking up from you that you're less than challenged in life. I'm picking up from you that you're not living a vibrant, happy, convicted, directed life. And I said, but you're not doing the work to actually appreciate any of that. The work that you need to do. I said, you need to get out to church. You need to study God's word. You need to drop your knee and pray. You need to hang out with people who love God. I said, you put yourself in a position to drift aimlessly out into nothingness. This is the conversation that we had. And he was challenged to bring those disciplines back into his life. We just have this aimlessness, and that's what sloth is about. It's letting life happen to you as opposed to you being a force in the context of life, following hard after God. In the 7th century, Pope Gregory describes sloth as the temptation to take the easy way out and to avoid the hard things. Thomas Aquinas said this. He defines sloth as the lack of appetite for God and the things of God. A.W. Tozer described it as a spiritual complacency, an unwillingness to grow in your faith and develop that spiritual muscularity. A contemporary theologian, Peter Kreeft, he applies sloth to the modern world by including busyness as well as laziness. And he says this: the workaholic may be as guilty as the couch potato because their constant activity keeps them from attending to the most important things in life. This is what slothfulness does. It keeps us from the important things. Sloth sneaks up on us in all kinds of ways. It sets our minds a wandering. It doesn't allow us to focus. It persuades us to stay on the couch or in the pew instead of getting up and doing something. It preoccupies us with trivial things like Xbox, things like PlayStation, or the latest viral video. Or we have little time or attention for the things that really, really matter. I had several parents, by the way, come up to me after the first service and share with me the idle time that is their kids sitting in front of Facebooks. And I say, it's simple. Take the unit out of the house for a season. Take it out. Take the Xbox right out of the house. Take the PlayStation right out of the house. Take these electronic distractions right out of the house, phone included, by the way. You should have a drop bag or something that the phone goes into for seasons in the day where you don't take it out and you concentrate on the things that really, really matter. These electronic gadgets can either help us or they can hurt us in terms of idle time, time that goes by, hours after hours, without giving ourselves to something productive. Imagine if we were literally to take the electronic devices out of our daily life, literally extract them for a season, even during Lent. Imagine the productivity and the vividity that we would begin to live by way of clear visions of God once again. Slothfulness is not just the attitude of laziness. There's a guy by the name of Hieronymus Bosch who built this beautiful painting, and it shows a man dozing in his chair in the middle of the day with a pillow under his head and his little dog curled up at his feet, and a nun is standing next to him, and she's offering him a prayer book and some rosary beads, but he's not able or he's not willing to wake from his slumber. He'd rather snooze than hear from God. And this is an old Catholic painting that was painted in order to motivate people to come up out of their slumber. It brings to mind, by the way, the story of Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane. Here we are, we're approaching Easter in just weeks. We're approaching Easter, and on the way to the crucifixion and on the way to the resurrection, which is the substance of Easter for us who are Christians, on the way, Jesus takes a prayer pit stop in the Garden of Gethsemane. And in that garden, he's speaking to his Father, and he's preparing his soul. He's becoming incredibly muscular and strong for the task that is just before him. He's developing his ability to be resilient in the midst of the worst moments of his life. And he invites some disciples to go with him into that garden and into that prayerful preparation for what will be the cross and the resurrection. So it's an incredible scene. And he asks the disciples to keep watch with him while he prays, to be with him in his hour of need. He goes off to pray, and he returns, and he finds them sleeping. He finds them sleeping. And he asks them a pertinent question. He says, "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" He asks Peter, he says, "Peter, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." In other words, Peter, you need to work on your faith muscles. There's something coming that you need to be ready for, that you need to be strong for. We need you to stand in the midst of temptation. And he says, Peter, you need to watch and pray. Not just me, you. So twice more he asks them to keep watch with him, and twice more he comes back and he finds his disciples sleeping. And he says to them, "Are you still sleeping? Are you still resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise." And at that very moment, he enters into the betrayal. Jesus is teaching us something as to the preparedness and the readiness of us when it comes to the important moments as God unfolds his kingdom. It requires that we be attentive. It requires that we be attentive. All he asked from them was that they would care enough to be with him in that moment, to be awake and to be alert, but they couldn't or they wouldn't. Not only did they miss an opportunity to be with the Lord in his time of need, but they failed to prepare for the moment of testing. How differently Peter may have responded if he had strengthened himself through prayer. How many moments with God have you and I missed? Where we too were just sleepy or busy or too distracted to spend a few minutes with God. How many opportunities to do good, to meet a need, have we missed because we've become slothful and soft in our approach to life? Now, generally speaking, the other 6 deadly sins are what we call sins of commission. In other words, you commit the sin in an overt manner. A sin of commission, like lust, anger, envy, gluttony, we think or we feel or we do something that we know to be wrongful or hurtful. But sloth is a sin of omission, not commission. It's a sin of failing to think or feel or do something in the moment where something is required. It's not just about falling asleep during your quiet time. It's about making excuses when God prompts you to do something. It's not a good time. It's not my gift. Well, they'll think that I'm weird. It's about avoiding conflict when conflict is actually needed. It's about waiting for someone else to step up. It's about dreaming of somewhere else instead of being present in the opportunity that God has given you. The great commentator, Derek Kidner, he writes this. He says, the slothful person deceives himself by the smallness of his surrenders. So by inches and minutes, opportunities slip away. That is a very profound statement. I'm just going to reread it. The slothful person deceives himself by the smallness of his surrenders. So by inches and minutes, opportunities slip away. We haven't done really anything wrong, but we failed to do something good, something that could potentially change a person's life, save their soul even. We begin to understand why sloth is a deadly sin. Sloth shows up in my life as a busy distraction rather than sluggishness. This is true of my own personal life. Now, I'm a morning person, so getting up, spending time in prayer and Bible study is not such a struggle for me. My mom was a phenomenal example. I would get up every morning, I'd come downstairs, and Mom would be reading her Bible and also the daily bread. She did this as a habit, and I saw her every morning doing that. She set a great example for me. So I got used to finding Mom reading her Bible and coming down every morning, and that, to me, is a life pattern. It's a deeply ingrained habit. Where the struggle comes in for me is to slow down on the inside and to give my full attention to God when I am taking the time to read my Bible, to devote my heart, to read through a devotional. My mind rushes ahead. I want to get the day started. I want to check my email. I want to follow the path of that notification that just came across my phone, telling me that somebody did something somewhere that I want to read about. This is what happens to me, and so I've had to turn off all notifications because they're incredibly distracting. My wife and I, we had a plan to spend a few moments focusing our hearts and minds with each other every single day. Now, we've been married 5 years this week, 5 years. And to be honest with you, I'm going to be really open and honest with you. There's too many times that we have missed the opportunities, Deb and I, to spend time melding our hearts together around God's Word, around a devotional. We started with the book, Jesus is Calling. It's a fantastic book, and that's how we started. But over time, we've allowed, many things to crowd out the important things. I'm not proud to share that with you, but that is true. And there's a sense in which I know that both Deb and I feel we need to get back to honing and to submitting our heart to God together and gaining that common language of what it means to serve God as a family. It's something that has to be worked on. And if you're not working on it, then you and your family are drifting. It's true. So what's the antidote for slothfulness? It's devotion. Every deadly sin has an antidote, a virtue that is the opposite. And devotion is really the diagnosis for fixing this issue of slothfulness. So that's what I'd like to offer as the virtue that corresponds to this deadly sin. The virtue corresponding to pride is humility. Worship that gets us to the place where we remember who God is. The virtue related to anger is the virtue of righteousness and prayer. And every virtue deadly sin has a virtue corresponding to it. And for us here today, slothfulness, the virtue is devotion. There's other things that we could have looked at by way of virtues that help us overcome sloth, but devotion is this ability to put God first and foremost as a priority. And the word priority comes from the Latin word a priori. And a priori simply means that it becomes the very thing that you shape everything around. Devotion means that you're willing to say no to everything to the one thing that you've said yes to. That's what devotion means. You're willing to literally shape your life in order to fulfill your commitment. That is devotion. And so how does one become devoted? Well, there's so many habits related to devotion, but the one healthy habit that every one of us needs to get into is the habit of attentiveness. Attentiveness. From laziness to love, from distraction to devotion, the healthy habit that I want to suggest to you is becoming attentive to the things that matter. And by attentive, I mean making our way through the day with our eyes and ears open to what God might be showing us at any given moment, with our hearts and hands ready for the opportunities that He brings our way. I'll say that again. Attentiveness is having eyes and ears open to what God might be saying and having hearts and hands ready to respond to those opportunities. It's an attitude as well as an action. So listen to these words from the Apostle Paul out of Ephesians. He says, "For you were once in darkness, but now you are living in the light of the Lord. Live as children of light. Everything exposed by the light becomes visible. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" What a great response to the sin of sloth. Wake up. Open your eyes. Stop sleepwalking as a zombie through life. These are probably the lyrics to an ancient hymn of the church, calling on believers to shake off their complacency and to be changed. It's an attitude of expectancy, of passion, and of desire for Christ and for His fullness. But that attitude has got to lead to action. Paul says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Do not get drunk with wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. So be careful, not careless. When opportunity comes your way, act on it. Seize on the moment. Don't stumble through life like a drunkard with your senses dulled and your reactions slow. Be intentional. Let the Spirit of God move upon you. When He moves upon you, do something. Being and doing is the rhythm of what it means to be Christian. Attentiveness is actually a collection of habits. It's the habit of spending time with God on a daily basis, to read, to pray, and to be with Him. And when it's what we call devotions. That's when we're most likely to hear from God, to gain a sense of direction for the day. It helps you be mindful. It helps you be conscious. It helps you to be in the moment that you're in. Write this down on a page somewhere. It's a profound practical insight. Someone said this to me many years ago, as I am a person who could spend too much time thinking about what could have been or thinking about how things should be, the future, instead of being in the moment. And he said to me, "Brian, if you could develop this art, if you could develop this in your life, you will go very far in all of your relationships." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Wherever you are, be there." Well, I'm just going to let that sink in for a minute because it's profound. Wherever you are, be there. Holy. It's the opposite of being slothful. Being slothful is avoiding where you should be, avoiding what you should be doing. Being slothful is avoiding the moment, whereas wherever it is that you are, being there, fully attentive to the moment that you find yourself in, is to honor God and to invite him into an incredibly powerfully potential, miraculous moment. Wherever you are, be there. If you're at work, be at work. Don't be bringing home and all that's going on at home into your workplace. If you're at home, be at home. Don't be bringing work and all that's going on at work back into your home place. If you're with your son, be with your son. If you're with your wife, be with your wife. If you're with your boss, be with your boss. If you're with God, be with God. Wherever you are, be there. Holy, be there. Now, attentiveness is also the habit of taking a Sabbath. There's nothing wrong with rest. God made 6 days to work and to work hard, and then he says, on that seventh day, here's the principle, take a day to recover from what has been an incredibly busy, industrious, productive week. Take the day to recover. I love what Rick Warren, a pastor that I respect so much, he would say this, and I remember actually a time in my life when I was pastoring in Calgary, and I was doing about 80 hours a week, and I was caught up in the ministry, and I was, to be honest with you, forsaking my family, and I wasn't living out what I had shared with you just previously about wherever you are, be there. I was like at work almost 100% of the time. And I went, it was actually my board that pulled me aside and said, you're not living a balanced life, Brian. We're worried for you. We're worried for the church. We're sending you to a pastor's personal life conference. And Rick Warren is one of the speakers there. We know you love him and appreciate and respect him. We want you to go. Go. And so off I went. And I remember him saying this. He talked about his own cadence or his own rhythm in life and how he got to places where he knew he was in trouble, but he learned this devotion or this cadence. He said to avoid burnout, he said we need to devote ourselves daily to God. We need to withdraw weekly from our work. We need to meander monthly from our life. And we need to abandon annually to rest. And so this whole concept of devote daily, withdraw weekly, meander monthly, and abandon annually. And that whole concept of just finding respite spots, finding Sabbaths, whereby you can recenter and realize where it is that God has you planted. Every time I go away, I recently spent some time with my son, his wife, and the grandkids. Every time I go away to another locale, to another setting, I turn my brain off to what is going on here, and I do my best to be fully present. So I was granddad for a week, and it was an amazing experience. But when I came back with fresh perspective. I came back with an attentiveness towards all things the bridge, an attentiveness towards all things my family that I did not have before I took that 8-day period off. That's the beauty of rest. It brings back the vividity of what you care about. It brings back to stark degrees what you really, really, really are convicted in that is important in your life. So Galatians 6:10, it says, so then, while we have an opportunity, let us do good to all people. When you sense a prompting from a friend to make a call or to cook a meal for someone in need, be in that moment and act. Don't just think the good thought, but act on the good thought. So let me bring this to a conclusion. Every year at this time, we have people that we would like to invite to the Easter services, right? There are people that we love, that we care about, people we've been praying for or talking to all year long, and now we're coming to that high point in our year, in our faith journey. It's the death and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's the story of our faith. And so that's what's going to be coming to you as we make our way to Easter this year, both on the Good Friday with the 2 services that we'll have there and then the 3 services on the Sunday. The story of our faith is going to be told. And it will be told in such a way that you should feel very, very comfortable inviting your neighbors, your friends, your family members, and they will be challenged to reconnect with the God who loves them. They'll be challenged to deal with what is broken in their lives and in their hearts. They will be challenged. And there will be a resonation that will take place in their life. They will hear truth, and the truth will set them free. So I want to just challenge you not only to think about inviting someone to Easter this year, but to actually take a step of faith. Get up out of sort of that comfort zone that you have and invite someone to be a part of that faith-building experience this year. I don't know what God might be wanting you to do these days, but I believe this message is for everyone in the room. We're all slothful to some degree or another. All of us need to pick up the bootstraps. All of us need a bit of a kick in the pants, so to speak, in order to reach what it is that we know in our heart of hearts God wants us to reach for. So I'm going to ask you to just bow your heads with me for a moment.